So appreciate folks joining today. We're going to be talking about, as you can tell behind me, Lisbon's World Exhibition 1998, also known as Expo 98. And this will probably be a little bit of a shorter talk than some of the others because most of the international pavilions are going to look just like the other international pavilions other than the facade. Basically, what they did for Expo 98 was they had a really terrible part of Lisbon. It had been originally built as a seaplane port in the 40s, shipyards, a sanitary landfill, all sorts of just garbage piled out along a very desirable part of the river if all that stuff wasn't there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a video that somebody made called "You Are Not Here," and it was something that they did as a exhibition on the site years later. And let me pull this up, and I think you'll get a real kick out of seeing exactly how bad this particular area looked. I just need to find where I've opened it. Come near here. Well, I may need to show all windows. Okay, so let me see, share sound, share. Now let me start this video here.
Good sound, but you know what, there we go.
See the video?
Got it now.
You have to look at that messed up landscape and think whoever had the idea that we could tear all that out and put a World's Fair there. Talk about visionaries. I mean, it was just, everything was polluted. They did a very nice report after Expo 98 ended. I think it runs about 338 pages. And they talk an awful lot about how much land they had to take out of there, the soil that was contaminated by the refineries. I think they actually give the number. I forget how many, 7,500 tons of steel they took out of the buildings. They made a big point out of, we're not just going to take this stuff and dump it someplace else. We're going to go off and recycle it and clean it and make it a clean area. What they had intended to do right from the start was not just have a World's Fair and then figure out what to do with it later. It was already pre-planned from day one that this would create a park, a permanent park for the city of Lisbon. It's called Park of the Nations. And each building that was built was done with two things in mind. If it was a permanent building, they already had to have a lesser for it after Expo ended. And if it was temporary, they wanted to make sure they could put it in and out with as minimal impact on the site as possible. So it's not like when you get to some of the others, when we looked at one a couple of weeks ago, that, you know, all sorts of stuff still sitting in Seville that they had not figured out what to do or had been run down. Every building that was a permanent building already had a landlord and use signed up for it. So let me go and we'll take a look at the site. Just bring up the right set of pictures here. Okay, share screen. There we are. So this is the site plan for Expo 98. It was done along the river here down at the bottom of it. And it was basically a long rectangular area stretching along the river. We'll see more about the layout in a moment. But you had a gate up at the top, the sun entrance. The one down at the bottom was for people coming in via boat. And then you had a north-south entrance. And basically had two sets of grids. You had pavilions off on the east side, these rectangular blocks over here. and some more over here on the other side. And we'll take a look at some of the way it was laid out. So you had a North International area, and all these buildings that are in here in these rectangles were prefabricated buildings that were intended to be taken down after the Expo was over. Each of the pavilions was given to the international nations for free under the terms of the BIE Charter. You don't charge for rent for international exhibits. What they did on here was you could go and get each of these cubes, which were 8 meters by 8 meters. So Spain had 5 of them. If you look at the top right, next to it, Latvia had 1 cube. This worked out really well because it let the smaller nations, again, participate along with the big ones. If you look over there, Germany had a couple half cubes because they indented the entrance into the building. Again, it's interesting to remember that if somebody said to you, I'm going to give you a free pavilion at the World's Fair, we're going to go call it Kendall Land, that's really great. You don't have to pay rent, but you're still going to have to pay somebody to build all your exhibits, and you're going to have to pay your people to staff it. So even getting free rent is not a free issue or free ride for the countries coming over there. And they had, I think it was 110 different nations participate in this particular Expo. Expo 98, by the way, was held to commemorate the 500th anniversary of Vasco da Gama's voyage to the Indies. So it was done with a particular time in mind. And the theme was to honor the oceans, that basically without the oceans, there would not be life on Earth. We've got to stop polluting them. We need to live with them, coexist with them, but we can also explore them and take joy in the beauty of them. So we'll be going to some of the aquariums, that sort of thing they did on that. More of the international pavilions. Down below, you can see it says the European Union. That was a pavilion at the base of the main tower, which was one of the 2 theme structures. We'll see more of that. South area, they went, again, very small for a lot of the areas here that had these smaller budgets for some of the nations. But they went through a very nice grid system, made it very easy to find your way around. And as we'll see going through the photos, again, if you look at the one for Pakistan or the one from Nigeria, they're all the same size. They're just decorated a little bit differently on the outside. And some more international pavilions. They also went for a shared pavilion. You can see up there when you don't have enough room to put everything in there, you can get some people sharing a space together. They had some international participants that put together, like in the islands of the South Pacific, they gave them 1 giant pavilion to go to. They also had the same thing for the Caribbean. One thing you're probably noticing on here, you're not seeing a lot of industrial pavilions. There were actually very, very few industrial pavilions at this fair. It really was truly a World's Fair exhibition of nations, communities, and that, with a little bit of commercial stuff put in. This is a map of the site, and it just shows you they had a lot of restaurants, kiosks, bars, that sort of thing. The main expo site, the pavilions for the international ones, all closed at 8 o'clock at night. The restaurants and everything stayed open. It was midnight or 1 a.m., something like that. But they had a lot of small restaurants. Again, the pavilions basically didn't have themselves. They were just squares of exhibits about the national, treasures or history or whatever. But all these dots in this map show you how many different places there were to shop or eat at Expo. They had a mascot for it. His name was Gil. He's here posing with Coca-Cola, one of the few corporate pavilions, and it was the official soft drink of Expo 98. You'll see Coca-Cola machines scattered all throughout the fairgrounds when we're taking the pictures. But Gil was named after Gil Yanes, who was a famous Portuguese navigator who had rounded a point of land named Camp Bojador in 1434. So they put out a contest for entries. They had 309 people throw their entries in, and the design here was done by a Portuguese artist, and a school student came up with the design and the name for it. So that's our official mascot, Gil. We'll see him a number of times. So if everybody has your guidebook in hand, we're going to go and take a tour through Expo 98. Let me jump over to the first set of pictures here. Okay. So we're in Lisbon. We're going to be heading on out. You can see Lisbon has a few hills in it, and went down to the river, and nice views from some of these of the Expo site. One of the very first things they did was build a new train line. It's called the Red Line, and this is the station that was out at the Expo site, still there today. So again, it's a very, very popular park. But the government put a massive amount of money into building this facility. 5 stations on the line were open for opening day. They later extended it. It goes out to the airport now. I think there's 7 stations in total. But this is called the Orient Station. Very modern, clean, and a brand new way of taking this former junkyard and bringing the population out there nice and easy. It also meant that because the trains were so easy to get out there that they didn't have to provide a lot of parking. They did build a new bridge going over the site, which was the longest one in Europe at the time they built it. But one of the things the Expo organizers did was they gave every resident of Lisbon a free one-day pass to go out to Expo 98. So now you've got a free Expo 98 pass in your hand. You got this brand new train that takes you out there. You can imagine a lot of people decided to go. They had a projected budget of 14 million visitors. They ended up with 11 million. Because this was basically a government-backed and government-funded project, knowing whether or not it made a profit or not is next to impossible to truly tell. But again, very well received Expo, very popular. Again, if you had a free ticket, why wouldn't you go, right? So this is one of the main buildings that was built as a permanent pavilion. It was called the Utopia Pavilion during Expo. It is now the Atlantic Pavilion. It's a major stadium for sporting events, rock concerts, other things out there at the site. Utopia, you would go in and they would talk about how we're going to live together, sort of a Star Trek, view of the future. We're going to have lift pollution, we're going to have lift war, we're going to have lift poverty, and here's how we can all join in there together. This sculpture in the front is called Man and Sun, and then down below you have the flags of all the nations that were participating there. And off to the right, you see something called the Wide Sea. That's the large walkway with the undulating tile work in there. They had a number of these sidewalks throughout the site. The Portuguese over the years had done a lot of walkways and tile works in their cities to try to break the up plazas and that. So rather than just have a big square sitting in front of you, let's go and make mosaics and put it out there. So this one was called Wide Sea. Again, you go out there today, a lot of these elements are still out there in place, the flagpoles there. If you look down here, we have a vending machine. And again, we see a bunch of those, and we look at it. We have water off to the side, which is the official water of Expo 98, and then we have the official soft drink of Expo 98, and they're all over the place. For my fellow Disney veterans, you might get a kick out of this. There was a set of volcanoes. It was built by Wet Design, which a number of alumni have gone to and worked at over the years. So these volcanoes were along the set of a set of channels or canals that ran by, and they would dribble out water, coming cascading down, and periodically, on no particular schedule that I could discern, they would all of a sudden erupt with a giant blast of water coming out to the top. The water would then run for a while, drop back down, and of course, kids and adults alike would all wait for the next eruption of the volcano. Again, you can go to Lisbon today, and the volcanoes are still out there, and they're still in operation out there today. So this is basically the Avenue of the Oceans. I don't have the name of this pavilion offhand. They went for a number of gardens and walkways. There's a koi pond here. You can see some of the splashes of them down below. The line for the Utopia Pavilion. As I mentioned, we had a lot of restaurants. Close my door over here.
Mail call.
Someday I'll train the dogs not to bark when the bell rings, but I don't think it'll be this week. So they had all sorts of international food over there, and it was kind of interesting because there was a fairly large-sized German restaurant. You of course had lots of Portuguese restaurants. Most of these were non-name restaurants that we wouldn't know today. There was a McDonald's over there. I think we'll also see later on a Baskin Robbins 31 flavors. But they really went for a lot of the international sort of look with the food. We'll see more of that as we go by. All these, the building in the back is permanent. This little restaurant was all made to be taken out. Some of them have survived, and you can still go get a snack out there, out at the site. Being the thing of the ocean, they wanted to have a component out there for the former port. This is where we had seen those old boats on their side and where the seaplanes used to come in. So they had pavilions out there exploring the ocean. We'll see more of them coming up. This is a little bit, just piece of artwork out there. The main ocean pavilion is just off to the left. We'll see that coming up right here. So in this particular one, this was again, it's there today. It looks a little bit different because here it's kind of drab, isn't it? Just kind of gray concrete. Today it's very brightly colored, different sort of panels and that sort of thing. But you would take the walkway over from the right, come into the upper level, walk all the way through it, a giant aquarium down below. And then at the very lowest level, down below water level, giant glass windows going out into the river, so you could actually watch the non-captive habitat of a flowing river with its dynamics of the fish, that sort of thing. This is still there today. They charge admission for it. It's a very popular attraction, and from everything I've been able to read, it's been well maintained and is still a very nice aquarium for folks to go out to today. This gives you an idea of what the international pavilions look like. So we see the very edge of the United States off to the left, and over here, Malta, the island off there, off the coast of Europe. And you can see how they went and worked with the graphics on it, that you have the American flag over to the left and it transitions over to the Malta design. As I said, most of these pavilions end up looking very much the same after a while period of time. So we're not going to spend a lot of time looking at one after another. But these buildings were all made to be prefabricated, giant concrete slab put down, and then they had the plans and the budget to take the slabs out and restore it to grass and parkland. This is the entrance coming in from the train station. It was called the Sun Entrance, and the statue again is called Man's Sun. So if you were to go there today and take a picture, it would look pretty much like this today, which is kind of interesting when you think about how many years ago it was that it's held up pretty well, that they never did do some of the things for other city parks that they had planned. Like we know Flushing Meadows doesn't look like it did during 1964. Other ones like the New Orleans, barely any side of it left, but you could pretty much go and replicate this picture today. They had these large towers. They were called meeting points. So if you needed to let your relatives know where you're going to meet, you could say, meet me at the Coca-Cola meeting point. There's another one coming up, the Vitalis one, which is the water area. This is the main Portugal pavilion. It was built in two structures. The one pavilion off to the left, this awning going off, and another one to the right, still there today. Here's Vitalis, the official water. Vitalis is owned by a brewing company that is one of the major brewers in Portugal, and this was their bottled water. Again, these towers are scattered around the site. The Portugal pavilion off to the side, official watch, and we're going to go visit the Swatch pavilion in a little while. It was one of the few commercial ones. But again, nice things you can do with the colors of the pavilions. For most of these are abstract tile works that are based on the colors of the country's flag. So if you look at Mozambique, you can see down below the colors of the real flag with the little red triangle. Well, there's a reddish triangle here, black stripe, green. Same with going over to Congo, blue with a star in the center. So kind of an interesting way that they broke it all up. One of the complaints some people did have about this particular area was it could get warm. You did not have a lot of greenery or shade. You had a lot of concrete and buildings out there. But luckily, being off the river, you also ended up with a fair amount of breeze and natural cooling. The buildings, of course, were all air conditioned. We're just kind of flipping through these. Somebody had a tortoise. I'm not exactly sure what pavilion he's in. I think he's in Bolivia, but I'm not entirely sure. And a restaurant staff entertaining and ready to wait on you. Down at the harbor, they had a whole variety of ships that would come in at different times. Some of them were on display for the most run of Expo. Others were from national navies. Just like we saw for Expo 67, they would invite Navy ships to come in, have the crews give tours, that sort of thing. They did a lot of that out here. You could also take a water taxi over from other parts of the Lisbon area to get there. One of the things that was interesting was when they first announced it, they said if you were coming by water, you had to have already bought a ticket. And then people were coming there by water, not having bought a ticket, and there was no way to get in. So they had to later decide to add a ticket booth back. You wonder why they didn't realize people would come without a ticket at first. Nautical exhibitions, again, what is the ocean? What are tides? What are the importance of kelp forests? All these particular things were done in these pavilions out there on over the water, still there today. You had restaurants out over the water, again, to make it a pleasant spot to go to. You can see this walkway here is actually floating on giant pontoons. Goes up and down as the river goes because it's affected by tides. You can probably tell right there, Japan, the rising sun, their flag and tile motif. Madagascar, Philippines, Romania, just all sorts of one. There are guides online. You can find the old, unlike the 64 World's Fair, there's no official site or anything. Expo 98 provided an official site maintained today as part of the Park of Nations. It will describe what are the artworks and pieces of urban art that are still out there today. There was even, for example, these benches they're sitting on and the planters with the stripes. They're not just random pieces of stuff shown down. It was a famous Portuguese architect that came out, or artist rather, that came out and designed these and put them around the grounds, and they're still there today. Again, more of the restaurants. You could go and get a lot of it. Had sidewalk cafes. The weather was pretty pleasant, as you could see for most of these pictures. Very blue skies. The big blue building is a theater. We're going to be seeing more of that coming up, permanent structure. Little nations like Croatia could be there. So we're going to go and hop over to another set of pictures here. Again, Baskin Robbins, we can all feel, oh, there's a logo we recognize. We can all go get our ice cream. But all these colorful banners, national flags and everything gave it a kind of a festive look. They did have some green areas. You can see folks sitting out here in the grass. Matter of fact, they had some very nice garden areas outside of the international pavilions, which was the more concrete area. Again, Utopia Pavilion, the flags of the nations. Here's two of the small industrial areas. You had Coke World off to the left, and the one here is Seashells and People. It's the pavilion sponsored by Shell. So kind of interesting that Shell's logo is a seashell. So they built the whole pavilion and had seashells from around the world in there. We're going to see more of the Coke Pavilion inside. Again, very, very little corporate participation. There were no major ride systems. I don't think there were any ride systems. Well, there was a ride system. We'll see the Skyway coming up. But they didn't have any Futurama type rides through the pavilions. There were also not any major movies. I don't believe there was any Circle Vision or Omnimax type of thing. But there were some very interesting things in the imagination and the virtual reality pavilion. Some of them use some cutting edge projection technologies. Again, looking back at the Oceans Pavilion from the other side. Lots of water being an important element out here. So you had these fountains pouring down. You had channels of water, little man-made rivers going through the site. This was, again, part of the water gardens. You could start walking across these stones, and then you would take out here and go through a bridge type area and go walking across the other fountains. Again, these are not just random things thrown together by some guy that did it. It's done by a noted Portuguese artist who crafted it, and the stones are still out there. Just a quick view of our photographer's stay at the hotel in downtown Lisbon. This was interesting. This is a tower called the Belém Tower. It's a well-known national symbol of Lisbon. So if Lisbon has a famous tower for the history, we're going to have to make sure we have a famous Belém Tower for the future, and we're going to be getting to that in a few moments. I don't know what cathedral this is, an art museum. More views just bopping through Lisbon. We're going to get back out to Expo. German restaurant, bigger than some of the others. Indoor seating upstairs, a patio seating down below, and you could go and get yourself a nice plate of schnitzel or bratwurst or bloodwurst or something else. This was called the Gardens of Ulysses. They actually sunk this down a little bit. They had leveled out the site for the cleaning out all the refinery and everything, but they wanted to go for a sunken garden look. So this area actually slopes down. You can see the walkway goes down. Put these palm trees out there, and if you look off to the left, there's a white statue of a giraffe out there. Then again, done by a Portuguese artist. They had about 25 to 30 Portuguese artists that contributed pieces of work to this, and that statue is still out there today in the Ulysses Garden. Canada had a good sized pavilion. Garden area up here to the right, terrace gardens put in. We're just going to flip through some of these. Well, this was one I posted online. People got a real kick of it and said, what on earth is that? I don't know how to pronounce it, and then Google couldn't give me a good Portuguese to English translation. But they had a number of these figures that were traveling around the site. They actually have a thing in their guidebook about how you get there at 9 o'clock, and the gates will start opening, and the pavilions actually open at 10. But the grounds come to life with these characters. And again, I can't pronounce it. My Portuguese is non-existent. But they had these colorful street characters wandering around, just like Disney has Chip and Dale running around. Well, here they had rockfish or scorpionfish or whatever it is on bicycles. And we're going to see more of them because they were all wandering around as individual units during the day. And then they came together once or twice a day, depending on time of year, for a large parade. So we'll keep hopping around here. Macedonia, I don't know how many of them have exhibited fairs. Place of Popeye, and I have to figure that one out one day. And we had a few looks inside. They had both. Portugal had a national pavilion, but it also had pavilions for its various regions, just akin to like we have here with states. So you could go into some of them, and people would be telling you what's particularly good about their city or their region. Giant souvenir stands. They made point of how these places carried everything with the Expo logo, and that in most of the national pavilions, they may have a small shop that sold items of their own nation. But if you want to get an official Expo souvenir, you should get it here at the official Expo shop, because anything bought off site may be a pale imitation. And if you're getting hungry, you can go here and see this guy. He's all set to start skewering some meat for you. Back over to Utopia. Again, this is the Ocean Waves walkway that we mentioned down. They did a nice job putting banners and that sort of thing out to break up the skyline. We're going to see the cable car system going up further. One of the things I found interesting, let me try to zoom in on this picture a little bit, was that we pretty much know one set of stick figures for men's room and ladies' rooms. Well, they went with a different design here. So the circle with a bow tie was telling you how to get to the men's room, and the circle with a bow in the hair was telling you how to get to the ladies' room. So why they went with a different set of international pictograms was sort of strange to me, but I think if you needed to go, you figured out where you could go. So you could get French food, you could get baguettes, you could get crepes, you could get all sorts of things. I think there was a British one, bangers and mash, all sorts of different foods you could get. This was a major pavilion. You can tell it's not a temporary one. It's called Knowledge of the Seas. And again, lots of things with interactive movies displayed, tide tanks you can put your hands in. Far end of the pavilion. Again, if you're a fan of the 64 World's Fair, let me zoom in on this one. They had their own special telephone booths, but here you can see the fellows on the telephone over here, but they also put kiosks out. They were making a big point of the fact that we have information booths, but you don't need to walk and find one. You can see the I for information, kind of international symbol. And they had touch screen devices that you could bring up maps and that sort of thing. And just like the World Key systems we had at Epcot, you could talk to an attendant if you get yourself totally lost, and they could try to help you. The attendants spoke multiple languages. A lot of the people working out at the Expo 98 site, there were a fair amount of paid staff, but they also had a fair amount of people that volunteered to work either portions or for the whole 6 months that it ran. By the way, it ran from May 28th to September 30th, so it right through the middle of the traditional summer. Again, more tile work, mosaics. It looks like an old cobblestone road. This is all new because it's all put in place on the former refinery site. This is a building called, the artwork here is called Curtain by Fernanda. I'm not going to mispronounce the name. I'm going to not do justice. Again, a lot of tile work. Portugal has been very well known for ceramics and tile work. So they went an awful lot of that and putting ceramics on the outside of the permanent structures, including over at the train station. They did some very nice murals. I'm not quite sure what pavilion this is in the front, more the theater building in the back. This is the virtual reality pavilion. You would go inside, and their idea was they would increasingly take you away from the world outside into the world of virtual reality. I don't know if they had a 3D component to it or not, but it went into the world of computer generated graphics and how you could start creating moonscapes, Marscapes, things that did not exist, and demonstrating what was cutting edge technology for 1998. More water pouring down here. You can see with everybody getting a free ticket, some of the areas started building up pretty good rides lines. You also had over here pedal cabs. We've seen those in a number of other World's Fairs where you could have a guide push you around the site. They had free transportation on the site. They had shuttle buses and trams. These guys you had to pay for, but they would give you a guided tour. You had a little bit of sunshade up here protecting you, and they would wander you around. I am sure that as they gave you the tour and you were going over the cobblestones, that was a true delight. But they, again, carrying on traditions of trams. I mean, they had push carts going back to the first World's Fair in 1898 or so, so they might as well keep up with the tradition. So we'll go over to the next set of slides here. Again, inside some of the international pavilions, there would be a big thing. Why don't you come here and join us? We can have a tea service, smoke a hookah. You can join us for some of our light snacks or foods. You could go out to a restaurant. You can get the world's greatest barbecue and, just really enjoy yourself with that. I don't know the name of this pavilion. I have to go find that here. It's a kind of interesting set with these tunnels and things sticking out. Pakistan, again, mentioned, you could get souvenirs of Pakistan, but if you wanted a souvenir of Expo 98, you had to go to the Expo 98 shop. Again, the garden went down. There's our giraffe standing off at about the 9 o'clock position. The water going through, you can see some kids doing what kids will inevitably do, is play with it and enjoy it. These are still all out there today. Uruguay having its own little restaurant. More of the international pavilions. Again, Canada, you can sort of make out a maple leaf over here in the center. These pictures have not all been fully restored, so the colors are not as bright and everything as we could get. But again, the fact that they could get it for free brought you places like Bosnia and Herzegovina into it. You don't see that in a lot of fairs. Just keep hopping through. Here we have Guinea, the musicians outside entertaining. And if you'd like to come on inside, we'll show you more of our country. Back over to the water area again, restaurants, and some of them were shops, some of them were restaurants, and others were pure scientific examples of what was done. Here you can see where Palestine's done a little bit to jazz up the facade of their pavilion, adding a 3D motif. Most of them were just flat in colors. Some of them went with a 3D motif. We'll see some others went way out of their way, like China and some of the others putting a traditional Chinese gate. Kind of an interesting little cart here. It was a vacuum cart, just ran around the ground, sucking up dirt and throwing it into the back. So rather than having just to have fleets of men out there with brooms and push cans, or the way we do it at Disneyland, this guy just drove around and again, trying to show you Portuguese manufacturing prowess, and you could get one of these and take it back home to your area. At Mexico, a performer. And again, you can see they've done some interesting stuff out here with large 3D figures. You could come by your own boat, as mentioned. At first, you had to make sure you bought a ticket. After a while, they had it. In the background here, you can see the bridge that they built to get you over from the mainland out to the island. Starts way back here and goes up, and then the main arch is over here. So at the time, was the largest bridge in all of Europe. They brought in traditional men of war sailing ships, and you could go on for displays and visits. The Greek Navy came into town for a visit. So did the U.S. Navy. This is actually an interesting ship. It's a U.S. naval ship, but it's manned by civilians. It's actually owned by the United States Navy. It was built about 4 or 5 years before Expo 98, and it's an oceanographic research ship. So although it's owned by the Navy, it's run on its contract by a private company, and it brings out all sorts of researchers and people from around the world to do oceanography research. At times, they chuck all the other explorers off. The Navy goes off and does classified work on torpedoes and other things using the ship. So the naval ship Pathfinder is still with us today, still sailing around, and is in good shape and keeping busy. Going back aboard the men of war, you can get an example of life, what it was like back then. And some other ships that came in, some were exhibits and some were just brought in on a temporary basis. We're going to see more of this tower over here to the left, the theme structure for Expo 98. But for the fans of tall ships, I was glad to see these. More of the port area. All sorts of traditional Portuguese sailing ships and fishing ships and things brought in. This one's a little dark. It's the aquarium area inside the main ocean pavilion. See a bunch of penguins wandering around. Outside view of it. Again, more of this tile work into the road. More vending machines. Virtual reality pavilion on the other side of this tile work. These trees, by the way, are still there and have finally grown in. It looks more like an urban forest today. You can also see here in the center of the black pillar, they went on a very low-key street light, no big towers overhead. Nice view of one of the fountains, and again, the Imagination Pavilion off to the side. United States, we have a costume character wandering around outside. I don't know why there's a penguin particularly there, but you could come and get your face painted out here outside. Go to the next batch of slides. So here's more of these street performers. They would come out, jump out of their bicycle, do a song, dance, and then ride back around. So you had faces and fish and penguins and looks like a pineapple sort of thing. They were very, very strange and different, but we'll see more of them in the parade. Baskin Robbins had a couple locations. Again, a warm weather climate, so ice cream did pretty well over there. Then we can go to the Venezuelan restaurant or walk next door to the Germany restaurant. Here's another one of the volcanoes done by our friends at Wet Design. The tile work down in the lagoon, again, done by a noted artist. These are not just things thrown together. Another one of the meeting points is time by Portugal Telecom. They were very glad to tell you, by the way, about their big push into fiber optics and how they were making it a nation, a wired nation. Pavilion of the future, predictions, what we're going to see in life coming up. Again, increased telecommunication is going to be a big part of it. You've seen this guy before. So lots of color. And now you can definitely see over here, if we zoom in. So for men and women, so we have our very different happy little faces there. You should put smiles on them. They'd be happy they found the men's room, but there they are. And just hopping through this thing. Again, even the trash cans are themed in here. All these benches were done with a theme. Here you can start seeing Lebanon has gone through a 3D look, putting these arches with some pictures of views of Lebanon in there. Large terrace garden you could go and visit. They were very proud of the fact that they had designed this to be part of a permanent park. All these buildings with all the mosaics and everything were all taken out in 6 months after Expo ended. Saudi Arabia, showing us the main mosque there, the cube in the center where they make the traditional pilgrimages. View looking down at some of the kiosks, you get yourself a cup of coffee or other snacks out there. Some artwork out here on the pavilion. Again, a lot of these things were done by artists that were commissioned for the pavilion. Autonomous region of Madeira. Again, like we have states, they have autonomous regions, and you would go in and find out, learn more about their particular area. And you would go and get examples in different pavilions of old sailing ships. It looked like this one employed a lot of people rowing, didn't it? But all about how Portugal and other nations had explored the world and how the oceans were allowing people to get from one continent to another. This one, I'd love to know what they were trying to show. We're inside of Austria. It's a giant stone of some kind with water coming down it. So I looked at it. I don't particularly think of Austria, but it is Austria. And giant pieces of stone with water bubbling down and signs in multiple languages telling us, please don't touch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 languages telling us keep your mitts off. Some views of just downtown Portugal. Skip through these. I don't remember. Sorry, just going through these. Yeah, I don't think we go back to Expo 98 on this particular box. So let me skip around the rest of Portugal. We want to see some of the more permanent pavilions. Again, now if you're going to put a facade on your building, you can really go all out. You have a traditional building back here, but build a facade out here to recreate one of the old missions. Down here, the volcano over here, we're going to get to this one, was built by the brewery company. You had this overhead walkway through here, and in the background, this is called the Water Pavilion. And this was done by the company that did the Vitalis water. They also the largest brewer in the country of Portugal. This was an interesting pavilion. It was built to look like it was a box sticking out in the air. So you had this large open area down below, fountains. We'll see another picture. There's a water trickling down, fountains in here, but it looked like the pavilion was a giant box suspended in the air. This is an interesting one. This is the tower to commemorate the explorer. Again, we'll get his name right here, Vasco da Gama, and we're going to be looking at a representation of a sailing ship. So we have the mast of the ship, the crow's nest up above, and then this arch coming out here to be a representation of a sail. Down below the pavilion here with the little square windows you can see was the European Community Pavilion. This was intended to be one of the two theme structures, the other the ocean pavilion. And basically you would go in this pavilion to take a tour of the EC down below, ride the elevators up to the observation lounge up above. But they were very, very clever in how they planned this building, sort of lopsided, right? The sail off to the left and this kind of open area out here to the right. Well, here's what they've done with it today. They built a five-star hotel out there on the site where the EC building was. It is the tallest building in Lisbon, and it is as I mentioned, five-star hotel, very well received hotel. You can see, by the way, down here about the river being tidal, how there's a mud flat right out here right now. But it was very smart that when they built the tower, they had the foresight to figure out what else can we do with this. They didn't have the time or money to build this for Expo 98, but it's become a very popular in-spot to stay in Lisbon today. Again, you get nice hotel, nice restaurant, nice gardens, parkway down below, and a train station right on the other side of this park, taking you into the main part of Lisbon. So here's what it looked like back then. This is where this was taken out and the hotel put in. You have a skyway done by a German system running the length of the site. It's still there today. You can go and take a nice ride along the river. It goes from one end to the other. Ski lodge system, totally off the shelf, put in place. There is still a fee for. There was a fee for it at Expo, where most transportation was free, but you had to pay for the skyway or a guy to push you around in one of those little carts. More restaurants. Little playground area over here. Again, this is more of the international pavilions. Here they didn't go so much with all the tile work on the buildings. They went with a banner out front, a different sort of roof over the buildings to break up the design. So you had a north look and a south look, and they were developed in two different areas. The air conditioning and heating systems and everything outside. And again, make you hungry, right? You can get your baguettes, your sandwiches, your pizza, all sorts of stuff going on. And again, you can see the different look for this particular area from the ones that we were looking at before. The same concept, a general square that you could get. You can see United Kingdom had a whole bunch of them. Netherlands having a few. Belgium here not only had the Belgian flag, but they had the European Community flag, as more of the nations are starting to tell you how they were part of the European community. So you see the same thing. Austria has two flags. France has two flags. And models, again, the whole theme of this was oceans, a legacy for the future. So they were talking about how oceans were important to get us around in the past. You had a theater. Some of these pavilions had show spots inside, and you also had a theater that different national groups would participate in throughout the season. Back over by the train station, more of the banners. Again, it did have some nice gardens put in. These gardens are still there today and well maintained. There's Gil, our mascot. He appears outside a couple pavilions. There was also a Gil figure walking around that would, interact with you. Basically, a puffy suit. And here again, you can see a 3D facade put outside the pavilions. The United Emirates give you a little bit more of a look to the pavilion than just a flat wall. China, as I mentioned, had a traditional gate. You had the lions, dragons on either side, and the archways. We're going to see more of China just in a second in the next batch of slides. That was the thing with film. You have to keep changing your film, right? So they brought in a number of figures from China, the displays. Very fanciful boat in the shape of a dragon with the pagodas on top. more of the traditional Chinese junk with the eyes so that you can help find your way around as you navigate. Shared pavilion, so you could see here in this one, you had Grenada, Montserrat, Antigua and Barbados, Trinidad. All these were sharing an area, so they, again, very small countries, very small budget, but they were able to participate in the fair. This one I got a kick out of. This was kind of interesting. This was the various territories out in the islands, and just people of the faces making up the names there. And again, they went real big into boat models and things, and a bunch of these with water being the main theme. By now, you probably figured out it's a restaurant. But when was the last time you got to go to a Tunisian restaurant? That's what sort of makes something like this kind of fun. You have a day, rather than going to McDonald's, go to Tunisia, go over to Mexico, get something at their restaurant. More of the gardens that are out there. All sorts of different plants. Hopping through these kind of quick. Again, Republic of Korea, it's, they do not call it South Korea. We know all about politics. Do not know what pavilion this one is. You have Switzerland having a national pavilion. We're also going to see the Swatch pavilion coming up. So I mentioned before they would have parades during the routes. So here we have a couple of views on coming up. I do not know what the overall theme of the parade was, but they went very fanciful. When I saw this, it reminded me of the characters in the central show they had at the Millennium Dome over in England in 2000, where all sorts of crazy characters. You were entertained watching it, but if you could try to figure out what the theme was, you were better than me. Ferry that would bring folks over. Portugal Pavilion. Again, the pavilion we saw earlier. And the main one that's down here today, this is still on site. Walkways that went from the north to the south end of the site. That was free, or you could take the cable car for a price. And again, different boats that were brought in, some by the countries and just put out there on display. Different performers came out and entertained. There's the water pavilion again. Interesting sculpture inside one of the pavilions. And it got hot, so people tended to bring umbrellas out, not so much for the rain, but just to keep the sun off you. We're at the water pavilion, as I mentioned, water's cascading down here, rippling down, and you can see everybody's trying to enjoy and cool off a little here. Some fountains that are jumping out, Uniser being the name of the brewer's ownership company. You had motion simulator. You could go in and get it, feel like you were taking Star Tours. Italy, Morocco. This was a kind of interesting one. Oceanophilia, all sorts of these little things out here. This was a pavilion to talk about ocean and try to do it at a kid level to try to interest them on becoming maybe a potential marine explorer or aquanaut, or even into aquaculture under the ocean. So it's done with a kid-friendly motif. Hot air balloon up over it. We'll move along here. And if you like ship models, this was the place to go. Every nation had to have a picture of models of their ships. So you can see the old ones. You get a really nice private yacht down below. You get one of the floating hotels that pass for cruise ships today. Or more dancers. These are all inside one of the international pavilions. I'm not sure which one this is, a piece of artwork. Again, ancient warriors and travelers. You see how many languages they put the pavilion names on outside to truly try to make it a tourist-friendly sort of environment. We saw some of this before with India. There's our buddy Gil. Welcome. He looks like a nice, friendly guy, doesn't he? Here's more of the parade. These are pretty big. Give you an idea of how tall this thing was. You can see the people down on the street level. And they had different performers out there. He's up there pounding away on the drums, guy in the pirate motif down below. They had pretty good sized floats. They talked about how they would have to clear the streets for this. The Skyway also, they would have to stop for the nightly fireworks show that occurred along the river. But they were asking people's cooperation to please get out of the way of the parade because it's not going to stop for you. So you better just get out of there. All pretty steampunk looking weird designs, huh? He looks like he's comfortable, although I think he had to pedal for a recumbent position to actually turn the wheel to make this thing go. You start zooming in on some of these, looking and said, the face, the makeup and everything is kind of interesting on all the characters. And we're done with the parade, back to more of the same. Pacific Island nations all gathered together. Swatch was interesting. Swatch, you could get a free tour of Swatch, or you could buy basically an electronic device that gave you tours of the pavilion and around the area. So you could buy it at a Swatch pavilion outside the Swatch stand outside the grounds, and it was or you could get one inside. And if you bought one of these devices, it came with a free one-day admission to Expo 98. And if you decided you wanted to come back, they could recharge it. So sort of like Magic Bands today, it was an electronic form of admission into Expo 98. And it was a little thing that if you didn't want to have a tour guide push you around, but you wanted to find out where you were, what you were doing, this little device. And I don't know how they did it. If it was done with little radio transponders, because I don't think GPS was big then, but it would basically give you a little electronic tour of the area. More of the water pavilion. Again, very, very little commercial pavilions. You had Swatch, you had the water pavilion, you had Shell, you had Coke World. This was a thing about Vikings, a little mechanical display going on. And I know everybody is urgently looking to see Coke World, so we'll make sure we get there before we leave you. China again, inside examples of kinetic sculptures. A hydrogen-powered car for the future. China put on a big display outside their pavilion with this dragon float that would go around. They also had acrobats and things that would entertain you. You can see it marching through the grounds. And of course, it all took you back to their pavilion. The long-awaited Coke World. So Coke being the official soft drink, they would have all these motifs of different Coke bottles and designs from around the world. You could also, just like in Coke World in Las Vegas, or when they had it down at Disney, you could get samples of Coke products, including the justly maligned Beverly, the worst beverage I've ever tasted in my entire life. But they had invited different artists from around the world to do their interpretation of the classic Coke bottle. And there were different designs and motifs out there from all these different islands and nations. Down below each of these little panels was explaining, what the design for this particular Coke bottle is, the artist, he or she that came up with it. So sort of a low-key, pavilion. I think probably more interesting to a lot of people than the Coke Pavilion had been at the 64 World's Fair, where they were kind of on smell-o-vision being the big draw. But Coke was a big sponsor and put a lot of money into Expo 98, for which the Expo 98 committee was very, very appreciative. And we're getting down near the end here, hopping through more of the international pavilions. Vatican had a pavilion here. They did not bring over the Pieta. They did bring over some interesting sculptures and pieces of artwork for it. Norway, we have a troll outside, and You can go over interesting juxtaposition. You go right from Norway right to Kuwait, and that's part of the fun of World's Fairs. Russia was here, very small pavilion compared to some of their past international pavilions, because by this time it had been broken into individual states. So that's the Russian state of Russia, not what we think of before with the USSR. Sony had a history of putting these giant jumbotrons out into World's Fairs. I think the first one I saw was Expo 85 and Scuba. This one had this large open area where you could watch the Sony Jumbotron. If you go on YouTube and search for Expo 98 Ringo Starr, you can actually see a really nice video of Ringo down on the stage here saying that don't come easy, and the Jumbotron entertaining all the crowds out below. So this was a popular venue. They also had a stadium out by the water where groups could participate on a stage, and you were on a set of bleachers overlooking the water. So this was the other free major exhibition area. And besides Ringo Starr, quite a few international performers did come through and participate. The European Union here down at the bottom explaining all about how they're going to be coming up with the euro and common borders. Now, of course, today a hotel. The bridge, again, mentioned the largest one in Europe. Again, a very tidal river, so it's very low at this particular point. We zoom in here a second. You can see, again, international, the particular territories and areas that make up Brazil. This was called the sea entrance. You had the sun entrance, the sea entrance, the east and the west gates, and then the dock for the marina. So this kind of gave homage to the fact it does sort of look like a refinery in that of what was there, but it was a marker. So if you were trying to find your way out at the end of the day, you could know which one to go to. They get a little repetitious after a while, but we just want to hop through them, get to the end of it. More fountains. You can imagine nice and cooling on a hot day. And here, this is what I wanted to get to. This is a nice view taken from the tower, and you're kind of looking down along the route of the thing. So we have the Skyway off to the left on the river, and again, that's still here today. You have the Utopia Pavilion up here at about the 3 o'clock position. It's today known as the Atlantic Theater, Atlantic Auditorium. You had the tile work and everything I mentioned down below. Garden area, these gardens are all still out there today, different gardens with different landscapers and doing it. The international pavilions here, this is the second set of them we saw with the undulating roof, and mentioned before we were looking at the air conditioning. These were all taken out 6 months after Expo ended and have been turned into gardens. Some additional buildings have been built on site, but it's been left more for a park than a industrial site. You can see Lisbon just off to the side. So you can imagine how the people building Lisbon over the years and all these buildings have been looking at this terrible use of the river for junkyard and refineries and everything, and how the city leaders absolutely were thrilled to get a World's Fair as the justification for cleaning all this garbage out and extending the city out quite a bit. It was a huge extension of usable land for the city. We've got one last batch of these things to look at. And you can see the volcano and then another sign of Americana off to the right. You can see the McDonald's restaurant. Porcelain Pavilion was one of the theme pavilions built by the Expo 98 Corporation. Mentioned earlier, Portugal has been well known for years for doing ceramics and porcelain, that sort of thing. So they had a whole pavilion here on the history of porcelain, how it was made then, how it's made today, and kids could get their, take their turn at trying to, make something, craft work to take home. You had a number of these water areas out there. There's pictures I've got somewhere of Gil. I don't know where I did it. I don't have it here, but Gil out on a jet ski out here enjoying himself. Another ship in for a different time. Spanish restaurant out overlooking the water. You can imagine how pleasant a dinner that would probably have been. This is called the Cameos Theater. It was also called the Jules Verne Theater. It was built as a permanent theater and has become a vibrant part of the art scene in Lisbon today. Well designed with both small exhibit spaces, but also a large stage for large scale musicals and other performances. Again, all sorts of tile work that's been put up on the buildings. Looking out from the dock area, over here you can see the sea stage. Here's the backdrop to the sea stage and the bleachers that would sit here. Again, free performances and concerts done throughout the time of Expo. Anybody up for a hula burger at the Hawaiian Hut? Boats that would bring you in from other parts of the country. They would come up and down the river, or quick little water taxis going over to other parts of Lisbon. Parts of the gardens that were put in. More restaurants. And Venezuela, he's out there. Looks like he's doing karaoke, doesn't it? But he's singing and trying to get you to come on in and join. Back for a quick look at the penguins at the aquarium. The big tank in the aquarium, again, there was two things you could do. You could see the captive animals in the aquarium tank, or you could go down into the basement level down below water and see things that were out in the river. Keeping in mind a tidal river, you might not see things at every particular time that you were there. Not a great shot, but tropical fish. Nice artwork outside the aquarium. This grass work here, it's interesting, it's fenced off. And that's because it's not just a grass area, it's a piece of artwork that was done in grass. And the photographer didn't get a great view of it. You can sort of see one of the levels down here, but then it went up into a set of towers and rings that were here. So they had found out that everybody wanted to go out and just relax on the grass. So they had to put these temporary barriers out there so that the guys' living, breathing sculpture of grass would last throughout the time of Expo 98. Again, go look at this today. They've done a much better design of making this look like, wow, that's a building I want to go see, as opposed to a concrete edifice. There's the sea stage and the Utopia Pavilion behind it. Couple last minute look at last minute international pavilions and some last minute dancers. And that's it for Expo 98. So, hopefully I didn't make too many mistakes if anybody had been there. Let's see what we have somebody saying in chat. Some of these bottles might be a World of Coca-Cola in Atlanta now. Yeah, they well might be, Beth. They did look familiar when Carol and I were there a number of years ago. You went through, and I imagine, that if they didn't need them in Lisbon afterwards, you might as well take them back to company headquarters and put them there. So again, Expo 98 was a real success. 14 million budgeted, 11 million came, but I think they were actually happy with the 11 million. And the nicest thing about it is that it left a park that is absolutely vibrant today. Flushing Meadows, kind of off the beaten path, it's sort of run down, for our 64 fairs. Hemisphere 68, which we may get to in 2 weeks, was again, run down, built up, it's going now. But this was designed from day one and budgeted from day one, that a park was not going to be an afterthought. The entire reason for building the World's Fair was to clear out the garbage and then to put in the park. Well, Randy mentioned, the cathedral face building was Macau. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. Where was the expo in relation to the waterfront area in Lisbon, where the monuments and Geronimo's Monastery are? I'm not all that familiar with the layout of Lisbon. I'd have to find a map, and I don't know where I put my guidebook. It was here a minute ago. Carol and I were actually going to Lisbon when the pandemic hit, and we were all set. We were going to take a really nice tour. We got 1 week away or so, and then pow. Okay, so Randy's saying it's quite a distance. Randy, being our world traveler, our former flight attendant, has, how many million miles do you think you have in, Randy? Oh, I just didn't know.
No idea. I never really kept track.
I know I've got 3 million on American and 1.5 million on United. So I don't know how many you have on Delta, but I'm sure it's a hell of a lot more than that.
Unfortunately, it doesn't count towards free travel, so but we
No.
get it. We get it anyway. So yeah.
So, but yeah, you did you make it over to Expo 98?
Yeah, I did.
Oh, okay.
It was
what-
kind of a two purpose visit. My father's father, my grandfather, was born in Lisbon, and so I saw family, and but then also I visited Expo. So it's a beautiful city. It really is. It's very manageable. I'd say it's kind of like, you know, Prague in a way. It's a large city, but not, you know, like London or Paris. You were mentioning about the train transportation. Actually, getting to the fair on train was not easy, or by the subway. Let's put it that way. That station was more of a regional station. To get there where we stayed, which was just adjacent to what we'd call downtown or the historic center of Lisbon, we had to make like two changes of subway train and actually go way out of our way. We had to go way kind of like in the opposite direction of Expo, change trains, go once again in an opposite direction, and finally get on a line that took us to that train station. I mean, we got there; it wasn't a big deal, but my friend and I that I traveled with, we were both kind of surprised that they hadn't. Well, actually, they were working on the train line, but it hadn't been finished for Expo, and I don't know if that was, you know, if they had tried to finish it or not. But it definitely wasn't easy to get out there from you know, the central part of Lisbon. And also the airport was really, really an old airport, very tiny. I think it's all been changed now, but yeah, they were. There was no work on that at all at that point.
Well, yeah, it sounds like their system is just like the LA system. If I wanted to get to Long Beach,
Yeah.
for example, which is a total straight line, you know, north south from me to where Randy lives, I can't do that. I've got to go to North Hollywood. I've got to take the train to downtown LA, and then I've got to take the train down to Long Beach. So rather than go whatever 50 miles this way, I get to go 90 miles in a giant ass triangle. So
Right.
someday, did you have any favorite pavilion or a particular memory of what
You
you
know,
saw there?
it's amazing because as you were showing the pictures, I don't have a huge memory of the whole fair. I mean, for whatever reason, I like that water pavilion. You know, the inside there, you know, how it was that box kind of angled up, and you know, you kind of what you entered and you were at the top of that box. You walked down, and there was a fountain that ran down the interior of the building to ground level. That was very interesting. A lot of like water kinetic type things. Portugal Pavilion was nice. That plaza between the two buildings is shaded by that canopy was made of concrete.
All right.
I thought was kind of interesting. And it had these like 3 square holes in it. And it was kind of fun to, it was a pretty lengthy line when I was there to get in. And you could watch as the sun moved, the you know, the light changed, it kind of moved across the plaza. And that Portuguese pavilion had some kind of an IMAX movie. May not have been actually, you know, officially IMAX, but it was definitely a very large screen. So I remember that. Yeah, the rest, it's kind of a blur. I mean, and part of it's probably because, like you pointed out, the international pavilions all kind of look the same, other than their tile facades. And one thing that you mentioned, I had always assumed that those large buildings that house the international exhibits were going to be used like as convention halls because they would have been ideal for it. But as you mentioned, they were temporary. I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, it was basically part of their plan was to get it out of there. And again, you can build it you know, a temporary structure a lot cheaper than anything you're going to have last all that particular, you know, length of time. So what they've done is they built some other pavilions out there, other buildings nearby that they do have convention halls and that sort of thing, but they didn't have the plan to maintain those for that period of time.
If you look at, I think it was the North International section, closest to the Vasco da Gama Tower. A lot of steel work in that.
Yeah.
That's
And it was
amazing.
interesting. They again, they try to make sure that everybody knew that if we had a plan where all this was going to go, who's going to buy the remnants of it. It was, not that they built it. Now what do we do with it? They had, as much plans to get everything out of there as they did to put it in there. So, hats off to them. Like I said, they did quite a, it's 300 and something page report that you can find online. And it's multiple languages, but it does have English as well as Portuguese, and it goes all throughout how they designed it, ran it, how many volunteers they had, all sorts of stuff. But they seem to be very environmentally aware. So that from the point when they started tearing down the old crap that was out there, they built the recycling plants right out on the facility, that when they cleared the first piece of ground, they were able to put plants out there to, chop up the steel and take it away, so that they weren't transporting waste through the rest of, Lisbon. They try to make it as on site as much as possible. And they can tell you how many tons of rocks and stone, and, evidently one of the biggest problems they had was getting all the old concrete out of there. Because where on earth do you put all that, steel you can recycle and, turn it into new Toyotas or something. But they had to come up with a whole plan to get all the concrete out and pulverize it. And we can use it to build some new highways and foundations for the bridge and other odds and ends. But getting rid of 50 years worth of concrete was quite a challenge for them.
One thing, Bill, I just recently discovered this, that area, I can't think of the names, where that Belém Tower was, that old tower.
Yeah.
Picture of it, and that monastery. And and there's a monastery right by it.
Right.
There actually was a pretty large scale colonial exposition there, I think in the late 30s, that I had never heard of till recently. Some pretty impressive temporary buildings. Some of the buildings remained, but I had never heard of that before.
Yeah, there's so many of these small fairs, the BIE, just like Expo 98 was pretty small. Some of them been even smaller, and, back over time, they would charter these. And like I just got a book in the mail yesterday for, California Expo of something like 1928 or something like that. Who's ever heard of some of these things? Well, if you were down in San Diego where they had it, back then it was a big thing. As today kind of lost to history. But one more book I need to put on my shelf and more research to go do.
What book is that? It's about the.
Let me go grab it.
Yeah, that's worth visiting. Most of those buildings are still there.
Right.
Park.
Right. Yeah, and put to good use. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a beautiful place to wander around. I love visiting there.
Balboa Park.
Yeah. Balboa Park, yeah. Balboa Park. That's a Hobbit park.
I love, there's a model train exhibit there. That's an ongoing thing.
Oh yeah.
Used to be free. I think they charge now, but to watch
do,
them, they enlarge this display. Yeah.
Okay, here is the official guide for the California Pacific International Exposition of 1935.
Oh, wow. So is that a reproduction?
No, it's a real thing.
Oh, okay.
So
I have the one to the 1915 exposition, which was on the same grounds.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to scan this and put it on my site eventually, but it was kind of interesting. You can see, again, you can't, it won't show up too well. The pavilion here is shaped like a giant seashell. That's the shell pavilion. So they did do some, funny artwork, and looking through it, some of the buildings you look at today and see down in Exposition Park or whatever, the Balboa Park today.
Balboa.
But, yeah, I saw this pop up and I said, oh, I knew a little bit about it. And then on the back, we can look at the effort Junket Mix Ice Cream. So, but
Junket also had the back cover of the Golden Gate Exposition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess it was a popular product.
Yeah, it's amazing how they can be so big and then so gone. But I mean, again, if I asked anybody about the 1935 fair, what fair was there in 1935? Well, there's the California Pacific International Exposition.
Well, the big one was in Brussels in 1935.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. But that's, again, back then they didn't compete with each other, right?
Yeah, and I don't think the U.S. participated in that one in Brussels. Yeah.
Don't know. I have looked at.
I'm pretty sure they didn't. Yeah.
The best in Balboa Park, the best thing to visit is their Air and Space Museum, because that's in
Yeah.
the old Ford Motor Pavilion,
Right.
and the architecture hasn't changed at all. I mean, a
Very
lot
Art
of that is
Deco.
still there.
Yeah.
So it's worth looking around. If you know where to look, you can spot a lot of the old Ford Motor Pavilion aspects.
They actually have a really interesting airplane out at that museum. It was, I think it was called the Sea Dart, and the idea was it would float on the ocean and take off and land. It was a jet-powered seaplane. But the problem they found was that when it landed, if the waves were any sort of choppy, the water would come up, go in the engine, and put out the fire in the jet engine. So yeah, so the seaplanes work pretty well for propellers. They don't work too well for jets. But there are videos out there of them taking it for a few flights, and they have it on display at that museum. And you look at it and you keep thinking, what were they thinking? Fire, water. I can figure that out.
You know, one thing about that aviation exhibit in the old Ford Pavilion, they have those of us who are raised on the West Coast remember PSA, Pacific Southwest Airlines, which became part of US Air, now American. They were kind of the original Southwest, but initially they only operated within California. In fact, they weren't even regulated by the CAB or FAA. Well, FAA they were, but not the CAB. They were regulated by the Public Utilities Commission in California. But they have an exhibit there about, because they were based in San Diego, and it's a pretty interesting exhibit. They were the first to have the hostesses dressed in micro mini skirts, and went for that whole image.
Right. Sorry, a friend of mine just texted me that in-law's house got broken into. So they're in Hawaii enjoying themselves, and then you get a call that guess what? So it's always something. Yeah. So Expo '98 again, small fair. In terms of geography, it was 650 hectares. However, that translates into acres. But again, it was a success that you look at some things, people happy, not happy. Well, people seem to be pretty happy with it. It got that giant eyesore off the river, cleaned up a tremendous amount of pollution. Again, they'll talk about how many tons of soil they had to haul off the site, how many tons of soil they had to bring back to the site to replace the damaged topsoil. But they really went out of their way to clean up an environmental mess and leave a great city park. So again, I hope you might have put some people in a daze, pavilion after pavilion after pavilion, all pretty much look the same, but they're pretty colors and they're stylized flags. And every now and then we get to see the work of things like the guys from Wet Design. So I always enjoyed, the guys from Wet do all amazing stuff with water. So kind of can have fun with it.
Bill,
Yeah.
we talked about this the last 2 weeks, about the difference between 64, 65 World's Fair in Seoul and Seville, and with regard to individual pavilion buildings compared to exhibition buildings, which is what was primarily here. And the fact that you indicated earlier in the presentation that the majority of this expo, as it was called rather than a World's Fair, right, was primarily countries rather than corporations and commerce. One of the things that that I think maybe makes the difference between the two that you could begin to identify is the fact that, can you imagine a large commerce corporation type participant not having their own pavilion and housing inside one of these exhibition spaces? Could you see IBM or AT&T or Kodak or any of the big ones, that needed to have a presence, their own individual presence inside one of these exhibition spaces? I don't think so. So it worked out well that small countries could come in and set up an area in these exhibition spaces and become a participant. I think it's kind of interesting to see that.
Yeah, again, I love the 64 World's Fair, huge fan of it, but that's the one thing that I didn't like was that, it was more an industrial fair. I do remember, going to Expo 67 and just being blown away by the much larger number of international participants at Expo 67. And then others, again, at Expo 86, a whole bunch of these, because they started going, after Expo 67, they started going more of the modular stuff, which I think was pretty much an innovation by Expo 86. And that's one thing I really wish 64 had done, was to come up with, whether the modular buildings, take away, tear it down, or whatever, something that they could have done. Because they had, when they were originally looking at the 64 World's Fair, there was a whole section of it that they ended up not using, which was behind the Bell System Pavilion, which had been where the Federal Pavilion was for the 39 World's Fair. So if you look at the original maps of the, excuse me, 64 Fair, it shows it going all the way up there underneath the highway. And so they had a tremendous amount of land they could have used, and they could have made that international land. They could have done, put these sort of buildings up, but they went all or nothing, which was, the New York City way of 1960s, bigger, better, all or nothing, my way or the highway.
Mhm.
And it unfortunately, it paid its price. There's a book out called Hi Ho to the Fair. It's the guy that was in charge of trying to sign up the international pavilions for the 64 World's Fair. It's a fascinating book. You can get it at Abe Books and a few others. It's not the easiest thing to find, but he goes into all his negotiations. He was particularly assigned to Central and South America to get these nations done. And he was saying he'd get all the way there, and then there'd be a regime change, and the new guys would all come in, and they had just a hunter had come and kicked out El Jefe, and now the new guys would come in. And you go to somebody else, you get all the way there, and something else would happen. So they really did try to get an international presence for 64, but then Moses stepped in it with the BIE, and that was just the death knell right there. He absolutely refused to give anybody free rent. And he ended up giving free rent to all the religious exhibits at the 64 fair, because he had to start filling in all these empty holes. But he absolutely refused. So even if you had a tiny little one like the city of Berlin, he charged them for it. And a lot of them just, like I said, you could afford, maybe I'm going to send 4 staff members over and put them in an apartment for 6 months, but I sure can't afford to go and build a giant ass building and pay rent on it.
Well, following this vein, would you maybe look at it this way, that Walt Disney, and after his death, Roy, essentially followed Robert Moses' guidelines with regard to Walt Disney World, Epcot Center rather, where the whole thing is primarily individual pavilions rather than a large exhibition space somewhere for smaller countries to come in to participate. Now, I mean, in Future Showcase, yes, certainly it's dominated by commerce. But in World Showcase, you only had a limited amount of countries who could come in and participate, and each have their own pavilion. So,
well, we actually had the original designs for Epcot, and Brock may have been there for some of this, was sort of a interesting thing. It was a circle, and everybody in a center circle, and you had a amount of space that was pretty much uniform for a country. But then you beyond it, you had the potential for a giant pavilion. So you could have Germany with the Rhine River cruise, and next to it could be something else, because all these pie wedges went out and went behind the other the big guy's pie wedge went behind the smaller guy's pie wedge. And I think there were 2, if I remember right, Brock, correct me if I go wrong, there were 2 of these semicircular, well, there were 2 round pavilions that were kind of interlocked at the center where Spaceship Earth was going to be. So that concept went on for quite a while, and I have quite a bit of artwork and stuff piled away somewhere. How it was going to be, the idea was everybody gets the same footprint in front, and then back beyond you. So you go in. You remember those designs, Brock?
Yeah, that was very early on, and that was kind of inspired by Walt's original concept that it was actually a working city, even though they weren't going to be the working city at that time. They kind of pushed out with the idea, well, a permanent World's Fair became kind of the idea. And it still is kind of viewed that way, but then they decided to break it up into the Future World and World Showcase area. And it was while these countries did pay money to be represented there, Disney actually paid the bill for building the facilities for them. I mean, they got something back. There's a rent they're paying to be there and have their presence. And I don't know how that still works today. I don't know if they're still running on that sort of situation, or it's since it's all paid for now, maybe it's like, we don't care whether we get their money or not. I mean, if they can't do it, they're still going to keep that pavilion going. Let's put it that way.
Hey, Brock, how long was that concept in thought? Because certainly when Disney died in 65, he still had, you know, his concentric Epcot. And then, you know, 15 years later, when did Epcot open?
83, yeah.
83, right.
Oh,
You know,
or 80.
18 years later, you know, we ended up with, you know, two worlds. So how long after do you know how long after Walt died did they go to this modified concentric plan of adding countries, and then
Take you in here.
and then here we go. Okay, and then changing it. When did this get changed to actually how the plan is now?
This was
I
You
Go
don't
ahead.
know.
I was going to say, I don't recall the exact timeline. I could say, well, it took this many years, but it went through all these iterations of what the possibilities might be. And that was before they even had any idea of who might inhabit these buildings. You know, this one here was just a concept of a layout, and then we would start to bring the countries in and that sort of thing. And I think as it evolved, they realized, well, there was a story they wanted to tell about energy, about imagination, about all these different types of things. So that would be one section of the fair, and the other section would be this World Showcase. And the idea then of theming it so more like a Disney park, to where you felt like you were in Canada or in England or wherever else it might be, just because you had styled architecture for that. So, and I think that's, you know, based on the fact that they realized early on that Walt's concept of the city, without him there to guide it, even with him there, it would have been a very difficult thing to say, to tell people, yeah, you're going to live here, but you're going to live the way we want you to live, because people are going to come and see this place. So that's becomes a little hard. They realized there's no way you can manage that. And so it became more of the concept of a World's Fair. And this picture we're looking at here was the idea of a World's Fair kind of thing. And everybody has their little space, and then it can be bigger or smaller or whatever, as you see how the shapes are there. And like I say, this design was purely conceptual. It didn't represent any particular countries and somebody having less space or more space. It was just saying, these are the possibilities that we could do with it. And then it evolved from there as they started to get the idea of who was going to participate and what their desires were, as far as, well, I want to have this facade that people are going to see, and, you know, whatever. Sort of like when you go back to the World's Fair of 64, 65, you had Bell had their building that was a very dynamic looking thing, and the different pavilions, you know, Ford and so on, and GM, they wanted to have that kind of presence again in these buildings. And so it kind of evolved. It was a combination of lots of things, just trying to come up with something that would work.
Yeah, when I started there, it was in 76, and this design that we just saw was pretty much the one that was being kicked around then. And it changed, as Brock was saying, they had the idea, you know, Walt had the city. I was in a whole bunch of meetings where everybody kept debating what the hell happens when people that move into the city and they get the right to vote. So you had
That's exactly it.
Yeah, you have a very small city out of Disney for Reedy Creek. You may have heard about the Reedy Creek Improvement District. But basically, Disney had a small number of people living out there on property, and they were all Disney employees. And if they ever voted for anything else, they'd be an ex-Disney employee, and they wouldn't have a place to live. So it was very well controlled. But the problem, and I was in a whole bunch of meetings where, you know, the lawyers, you know, again, we may love or hate lawyers, but the lawyers were basically saying, we can't take this risk. If we go and build this city and everybody moves in there and they decide, hey, we want to go do something else, you get the vote. That's why when Disney built the City of Celebration, they built it, sold it, and then de-annexed it. So Celebration is no longer part of the Disney property. Because if the people in Celebration decide, by law, we're going to paint all the buildings and look like a McDonald's restaurant, you'd be stuck with every building looking like a McDonald's
Yeah.
restaurant. Or if they decided that we're going to, outlaw any Toyotas or whatever. So that was the whole problem. They were never able to crack the issue. This beautiful city, you got 1 million people living here. And if they decide they don't want to do it the Disney way, they're going to do it the people's way. And nobody could find a way around that. So
Well, that's utopia for you, isn't it? I mean, isn't that the definition of?
yeah, everybody keeps saying that Walt would have found a way around it. I don't know how he would. The fact he was able to actually put together the Reedy Creek Improvement District and everything else was astonishing, to be able to do what they did for a multi, county jurisdiction and all the rest of that. But, people will screw it up. That's the whole unfortunate thing. So they initially came up with the idea of the city, and nobody could figure out how to pull it off. So then we went to the idea of the permanent International World's Fair, with the design that we just saw. And then that became the issue again, just like with everything else. Who's going to pay for it? And you can go down to Belize and ask how much money they have to put in it. And you could go to whatever. They didn't have a lot of money putting into it. But hey, if you went to the Bell system and said, hey, well, how would you like to do the thing about communications? Well, they got money. You want to put in a pavilion about the seas or something. Oh, these guys got money. So it started just like the '64 World's Fair, diverting more into a sponsor, a corporate sponsor. But even back before we got to Epcot, Disney's been doing a corporate sponsor since the day Disneyland opened. If you went up and down Main Street, every shop on Main Street was not owned by Disney. Well, the Emporium was owned by Disney, but almost every single thing
It's
else,
corporate. Yeah.
including the Wizard of Braz, was so you could go and get a Wurlitzer organ, buy that. The Yale Lock Shop, all that sort of stuff was licensed. So Disney's, we used to call it OPM, other people's money. And it was built, with OPM, and then the same thing. You go off to Florida, you do the same sort of thing. Disney spent most of the money for Florida, but now you had Eastern Airlines come in, and they were the official sponsor of Duke. You had Wings, and you had other GE putting in the Carousel of Progress, that sort of stuff. So corporate money always speaks, and that was a nice thing. If you sign a contract with a corporation, they're stuck with it. You sign it with El Jefe, and El Jefe's thrown out. The new guy just says, I ain't paying the bills on that anymore, and you're stuck with it. So politics became a big issue.
I found it amusing that this past week or so, what popped up on YouTube's homepage, you get a variety of videos, and one of them was somebody had reposted or had posted the very first Wonderful World of Disney when they broadcast it for the first time in color. And I think this was in 65, I think was the air date. So I happened to watch it again where Walt goes and essentially explains about Florida and explains about Epcot. And as he's pointing with his stick to the big map of Epcot on the wall there, and they're showing the perspectives, he shows that the centerpiece, the focal point of Epcot was this hotel tower in the center. And I just had to have a laugh thinking, well, first of all, the hotel was only like 10 or 15 stories tall. It didn't seem like it was very big at the time. And I thought, that'll never work because, commerce and industry, yes, they come in and they're going to stay in the hotel for conventions and stuff like that. But I thought, no, that'll never work. Some industrial giant's going to want to come in and plant their landmark in the center of this thing. And it's not going to be a little 15-story hotel. I had a good laugh at it, watching it again.
Well, back at that point in time, keeping in mind that would be the tallest thing in that part of Florida by about 14 stories.
Well, the tallest thing in Florida at the time, it was the Orange Tower. that's out in the middle of the Everglades up in central part of Florida, you know, the orange tower that stands there. It's a, I don't know if anybody's ever been to it, but it was the tallest structure in the state of Florida at the time. I don't think it is anymore, but it was.
Remember, Brock, were you there when they, for jokes, they started putting on bumper stickers to the cast members? I skied Space Mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
we had t-shirts. And matter of fact, a bunch of the guys that worked down at Space Mountain in Florida all went up to go skiing someplace up north. But there was barely enough snow to get down a hill, but they were the Space Mountain ski team. And they had sweatshirts made and everything. And people were trying to figure out, I've heard of Brody Mountain, I've heard of Vail, I've never heard of Space Mountain. But yeah, they had bumper stickers and t-shirts and sweatshirts and everything made. I skied Space Mountain.
Yeah. Well, part of that too was the fact that it looked like it was a big snow mountain, you know, in Florida, especially because that was a huge building there, you know, with the double track and everything. It's, you know, almost twice the size of what's at Disneyland. So it's huge.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great fun. That one was there when I started working in '76, so I got to help build the one in California, and it always felt like, you know, the smaller brother or something, but it still came out pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I started there in '72, and they were just they were planning it at that time, because I got involved in the planning and helped work out the whole way the loading and unloading station was going to work relative to getting in and out of the building and that sort of thing. So but the thing that was interesting, we went down there while it was under construction on one of our first business trips, and they took us on a ride. The ride system was actually functional. The building was still being built. There was none of the show in it yet. It was just the track and all that. And so we got to take a test ride on it. And one of the things they like to do, because they did it with all the lights on, there's a place where the ride comes along and it does a quick little drop to get under a section of track that crosses it at 90 degrees. And they put everybody that was there for the first time in the back portions of the ride cars with somebody else in front, you know, that it was already there. And as you'd come to that spot, they would duck down because you're going along, you have no idea where the track's going, and suddenly there's a beam in front of your face. And I mean, literally, you dropped it seemed like you were like inches away. You were actually a few feet away. But when you're moving that fast and you suddenly see this monstrous beam holding track that's right where your head is, yeah, everybody drops to the floor in the vehicle, where in the dark, you never are aware of that. You just are going along in the darkness and suddenly it drops and that's a little thrill. But the thrill of riding it in with a lighted condition was, oh my God, my head's coming off, you know, type of thing.
The first time I rode it, we were real excited, and you know, we're going to go and have a great ride on this thing. Tired of putting sandbags through it, so we got on it, hit the dispatch button, ran across the platform, jumped in, took off, got up to the first turn, and it stopped. And I was on the inside of the turn, and the guy on the outside of the turn was a much bigger guy than me, and he's falling over, and I'm trying to hold him back, and he's trying to hold onto the rock, and it's like, you know, we don't want to get to know each other that well. What are we going to do? And we're sitting there, and you had to have these tags on. If you came into the building, you had to wear a tag to show where it was. But finally, a door opens down below, and this little tiny voice says, "Is there anybody in the mountain?" Yeah, we're up here. Come get us. And there's all throughout the ride that basically, if you stop at the bottom of a hill, there's a winch up at the top that they winch up to the top and give you a push, and gravity brings you the rest of the way. But we're trying to tell the guy how the winch works. Yeah. Did you ever hear about the guy that hit the steel beam in Florida, though?
I seem to recall something about that. Somebody stood up in the car.
Yeah, there was there's been a couple of idiots that have tried to commit suicide or do something. One was a cast member, and he thought it'd be really funny to fool his other cast members, because when they would send out a rocket that was less than fully loaded, they would say, basically, I forget what code number they came up with, but it's a code whatever. And he thought it'd be really funny to jump out of the rocket and have to see what they would do if a full rocket went out and an empty rocket came back. So as it was coming into the re-entry tunnel, he got out, tried to stand up, and he took a beam right across the face. fell out of the rocket down to the ground. So it comes into the station and they hear moaning from the back. Well, they knew it was a cast member. They're like, "Hey, Brock, not funny. Come on back. Hey, Brock, not funny." And then somebody says, "Look at all the blood and teeth," you know, and yeah, he had taken it right across the face. So
wow.
yeah, but yeah, the best Space Mountain story that I had though is I was working at the Contemporary. We had a fraud going on at the front desk, so I was down there posing as an efficiency expert, and I had to just spend all my hours at the front desk so they get used to you being around. And this little old lady, 82 something or other, comes up to the front desk and she says, "I don't have the key to my room and I need to get in there in a hurry." And well, if you need to use the restroom, there's one right here. No, I've got I got to go and get all my stuff out of my room. Well, where's the key? My boyfriend has it. Well, where's your boyfriend? Well, he just died on Space Mountain. And yeah, he had a heart attack, died on Space Mountain. So we're going, "Well, that's really too bad. What's the sense of urgency? I have to get my stuff out of his room before his wife gets here."
Sorry about that.
It's no joke. So we had to come and figure out, did she really belong in that room? Yeah, got up and got her out of there, but had to de-mistress the room before the wife got there to claim it. So I
Did the
just,
wife find out?
what's that?
Did you get the stuff out of the room, or did the wife find out?
Yeah, but you got to figure out, well, she may look like a little old lady, but she was still living young. So yeah.
Bless her heart. Where you go, babe?
The guys at the front desk, so there was a strange one even for them. And you can imagine hotels, you get all sorts of strange things going on.
Yeah.
Well, I hope people enjoyed a trip back to Expo 98. And,
Hey, Bill,
Hey, I enjoyed listening to you talk about Disney World.
real quick, let me answer Tom's question.
question.
Tom's question to me. He wants to know what's in the picture frame above the clock. Well, it's not a clock. It's a small plate, decorative plate, but it's a digital picture frame. I just don't have it turned on. It displays, digital picture frame. I just don't have it turned on. So Tom, instead of typing in an answer, I just thought I'd tell you that's all.
Great. Yeah, I've got one of those frames in the living room that a guy made. It looks like a giant Kodak slide for the outside of it. Kodak Kodachrome, and it looks really nice. And it was funny. I had it on my desk at when I worked for Bank of America. I had it on my desk at work, and it was just flashing through pictures of the kids or vacation things, whatever. And this sales guy was in one day, and he was like looking at it. "Why do you have a picture of my college on your desk?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" "Well, it turned out he had gone to the same school I had gone to 30 years later." And he was just sitting there watching, this thing's distracting. I usually turn it off, but this day he came up with a picture of the college sort of thing. And I was then wondering, did he really go to my college, or has he just done a lot of research or something? But no, he had gone there. So yeah, we haven't turned ours on because it's across the room and you're trying to watch TV, and the next thing you know, it's pictures too much. But it's kind of neat. So, well, I have Expo. Oh, there's a talk I'm trying to get scheduled on Israel at World's Fairs. I'm working on a schedule with that guy. I'm trying to also get the guy to commit to Hemisphere 68, or I will do it. And then we may jump back to the wonderful world of Disney, because I'm starting to run out of World's Fairs on some of these things. But next week, you all get to sleep late. It's at 6 o'clock in the morning. I will be going and helping tow cars for people that didn't move their cars out of the way for the Granada Hills Street Fair. So there won't be any talk next week. I'll be out making people just love us as we tow away their cars, and hopefully enjoying the street fair. So appreciate folks joining today, and
Loved every minute of it. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Kendall. I hope you're doing well down there with all your peacocks and everything out in Palos Verdes.
I'm hanging in there. I was supposed to go horseback riding a day and it didn't work out.
Oh, well, go next Saturday.
No, I'm going to a memorial next Saturday.
Great. Yeah. I will see you all.
Take care, Bill. See you
Thank you,
later.
Bill.
Thank you, Bill.
Bye.
Thank
In a couple
you.
weeks, Bill. Great job. Thanks.